I never raised my voice, not once. I didn't slam a single door, I just started making phone calls. The first one was to my lawyer, the second was to my financial advisor. The third was to a real estate agent I'd known for 20 years. By the time the sun had painted the sky orange and purple that evening, I had set something in motion that nobody in my family, the family I thought I had, saw coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And before we get started, please tell us what city you're watching our videos from. My name is Frank Miller. I'm 62 years old, and for the last 14 years, I have been a stepfather to a woman named Megan. When I married her mother, Susan, Megan was 18, fresh out of high school. A whirlwind of plans and dreams that seemed to change with the tides. Susan and I met at a fundraiser in Seattle. She was a widow, graceful and kind, or so I believed. Megan had lost her biological father to a car crash when she was just 12. I was never trying to replace him. I never once asked her to call me Dad. I was just trying to be there. And for 14 years, I was. I paid for her university tuition when she decided on a business degree at the University of Washington. I paid for her off-campus apartment when she decided the dorms were too noisy for her to study. I paid for her car when she insisted she needed reliable transportation for an internship. I paid for her trip to Europe when she framed it as a vital educational experience. I paid for her first business venture when she announced she was going to be an entrepreneur. That business, a chic little boutique, went under in less than 6 months. I didn't say a word. I just quietly paid off the debts and helped her navigate the paperwork to close it down properly. I helped her move house 4 times. I fixed her car on 3 separate occasions when the mechanic's bill was more than she could handle. I was there at 2 in the morning when she called me, sobbing, because of a bad breakup. I was there when she got a nasty case of food poisoning and needed someone to rush her to the emergency room. I was there when she'd have a blowout fight with her mother and needed a calm voice to talk sense into both of them. Susan always said I spoiled her. Maybe I did. But Megan was the closest thing I would ever have to a daughter. My first marriage ended before we had children. This was my second chance at having a family, and I was determined to do it right. 2 months ago, Megan got engaged to a man named Kevin. A nice enough guy, worked in tech, and he seemed to make her happy. I was genuinely pleased for her. They set a date for September, planning a massive fairy tale wedding at a vineyard in Napa Valley. 200 guests, a string quartet, flowers flown in from Holland. The works. Susan asked me one evening how much I thought we should contribute. I told her not to worry about it. I'd take care of the wedding costs, all of them. It's what fathers do, I said, even stepfathers. Megan hugged me so tight I could barely breathe when I told her. She actually cried a little. She said I was the best, that Kevin's family could never afford something like this, that it meant the world to her. Susan squeezed my hand across the dinner table and gave me that smile, the one from the early days, back when things were still good between us. I should have known better. 3 weeks ago, Megan came over to the house with Kevin. They wanted to go over some wedding details, the seating arrangements mostly, the delicate politics of who sits where, who gets placed next to whom. We were in the living room, spreadsheets and diagrams spread across the coffee table, when Megan's phone rang. It was her Uncle Mike, her biological father's brother, who lived out in Chicago. They'd always been close. She put him on speaker. They talked about the wedding. He said he was flying out for it, that he wouldn't miss it for the world. Then he asked, his voice a little thick, if her dad would have been proud. Megan's eyes got misty. Yes, she said. Absolutely. They talked about memories, about how her father used to dance with her in the kitchen when she was little. I didn't mind this. I never minded when she talked about her biological father. He was part of her life. I respected that. Then Uncle Mike said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "And I'm so glad you're keeping it just family, Meg. Your dad would have wanted that. No outsiders, just the people who really matter." Megan laughed. She actually laughed, a light, airy sound. She said, "I know, right? That's exactly what I wanted, just real family." I looked at Susan. She was staring at a spreadsheet, her focus suddenly absolute. She didn't look up. Kevin shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I asked Megan what her uncle meant by that. She looked at me as if I'd interrupted something sacred and private. She took the phone off speaker and walked into the kitchen. I could hear her muffled voice saying something about calling him back later. When she came back, I asked again. She sighed, a sound full of theatrical exasperation. She said it wasn't a big deal. She said Uncle Mike was just excited about the wedding. I said, "Megan, what did he mean by no outsiders?" She looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at his hands. Then she said it. She said, "Frank, you've been great. You really have. But this is my wedding day. It's about me and Kevin, and it's about honoring my real dad's memory. I think it would be better if you didn't come." I didn't understand at first. I thought the words must have gotten jumbled on their way to my brain. I said, "What?" She said, "I don't want you at the wedding." Susan finally looked up. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but nothing came out. I said, "Megan, I'm paying for the wedding." She said, "I know, and I'm grateful, I really am, but this isn't about money. This is about what feels right to me, and having you there sitting in the front row like you're my dad, it just feels wrong. My dad died. You're not him. You're Frank. You've been nice to me, but let's be honest about what this is." The room went silent. Kevin said very quietly, "Meg, maybe we should talk about this later." She ignored him. She was looking at me now, and her expression wasn't angry. It was almost pitying. She said, "I've been thinking about this a lot. The more I plan this wedding, the more I realize I want it to be authentic. I want to honor my father. I want his memory there. And I can't do that if you're sitting there pretending to be him." I said, "I never pretended to be your father." She said, "You kind of did, though. You always acted like you had some right to be involved in my life. You always acted like I owed you something." Susan said very softly, "Megan, that's not fair." Megan turned on her mother. She said, "Mom, you know it's true. Frank's always been hovering, always asking questions, always trying to be part of everything. I'm 32 years old. I don't need a dad anymore. I especially don't need a fake one." I stood up. I needed to move, needed to do something other than sit there and absorb this. I said, "So, you want me to pay for your wedding but not attend it?" She said, "I mean, if you want to put it that way, yes. I'm not saying you have to pay for it, but you offered. If you don't want to anymore, that's fine. Kevin and I will figure something out." I looked at Susan again. She was crying now, silently, tears just running down her face, but she didn't say anything. She didn't tell Megan to stop. She didn't defend me. That's when I knew. This wasn't just Megan. Susan agreed with her. Maybe not out loud, but in the way she stayed silent, in the way she wouldn't look at me, I could see it. She'd been thinking the same thing. I was the outsider. I'd always been the outsider, I said very calmly. "All right." Megan blinked. She said, "All right, what?" I said, "All right, I won't come to the wedding. Is there anything else you need to tell me?" She looked relieved. She actually smiled a little. She said, "No, that's it. I'm glad you understand, Frank. I really am. This doesn't change anything between us. I still care about you, but this day is special and I need it to be right." Kevin stood up. He said they should probably get going. Megan agreed. They gathered their papers and headed for the door. Before she left, Megan turned and said, "Thanks for being cool about this, Frank. You're a good guy." Then they were gone. Shipu, Susan, and I sat in the living room for a long time without speaking. Finally, she said, "She didn't mean it the way it sounded." I said, "Yes, she did." She said, "She's just emotional about the wedding. She misses her father. You can't take it personally." I said, "Susan, your daughter just told me I'm not family, that I'm an outsider, that I've been pretending for 14 years. How exactly am I supposed to take that?" She didn't answer. I said, and you didn't say anything. You sat there and let her say all of that, and you didn't say one word in my defense. She said, what did you want me to say? She's my daughter, Frank. I can't control how she feels. I said, you could have told her she was wrong. You could have told her I've been there for her since she was 18 years old. You could have told her that family isn't just blood. Susan wiped her eyes. She said, maybe she's right, though. Maybe we've all been pretending. That was the moment I knew my marriage was over. I didn't argue with her. I didn't try to change her mind. I just stood up, walked upstairs to my office, and closed the door. Then I started making those phone calls. The next morning, I told Susan I needed to take care of some business, that I'd be out most of the day. She barely looked up from her coffee. I met with my lawyer first. Her name is Dorothy, and we've known each other for 30 years. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then pulled out a notepad and started writing. She said, are you sure about this, Frank? I said, completely. She said, this is going to hurt a lot of people. I said, they hurt me first. She nodded. She said, all right then, let's talk about the house. The house Susan and I lived in was in my name only. I'd owned it for 5 years before we got married, and we'd never changed the title. It was a nice house in Bellevue. 4 bedrooms, view of the mountains, worth about $2 million. Susan had moved in when we got married. Her name wasn't on anything. Dorothy said I had every legal right to sell it. Susan would have no claim unless she could prove she'd contributed significantly to the mortgage or renovations. She hadn't. I'd paid for everything. I asked Dorothy how long it would take to sell a house like this if I wanted to move quickly. She said, in this market, you could have it sold in 2 weeks if you price it right. I said, do it. Next, I met with my financial advisor, Gerald. I told him I needed to liquidate some investments and move money around. I wanted everything separated, everything clean, no joint accounts, no shared assets. I wanted to know exactly what was mine and what needed to be protected. Gerald asked the same question Dorothy had. Was I sure? I was sure. He said it would take a few days to sort everything out, but it could be done. Then I met with a real estate agent named Marcus. He'd sold me the house originally. I told him I wanted to list it immediately. I wanted it sold before the end of the month. He whistled. He said, that's fast, Frank. What's going on? I said, I'm making a change. He said he could do it. He'd have photographers out that week. We'd list it high, see what happened. I thanked him and went home. So, Susan was in the kitchen when I got back. She asked where I'd been. I said, taking care of things. She said, Megan called, wanted to know if we could all have dinner next week to finalize some wedding details. I said, you can have dinner with her. I'm not going. Susan frowned. She said, Frank, don't be like this. She apologized. I said, no, she didn't. Susan said, well, she feels bad. That's basically the same thing. I said, it's not. I went upstairs. I had work to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved through the house like a ghost. Susan asked me several times what was wrong. I told her nothing. I was just busy. She seemed to accept that. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. Susan saw it when she came home from her book club. She came into my office, holding her car keys, face pale. She said, why is there a for sale sign on our lawn? I said, because I'm selling the house. She said, you're what? I said, I'm selling the house. It's mine. I'm selling it. She said, you can't do that. I live here. I said, not for much longer. She stared at me. She said, Frank, what is going on? I said, I'm disappearing, Susan. That's what Megan wanted, isn't it? For me to not be there. Well, I'm taking her advice. I'm removing myself from this family. She said, this is insane. You're being ridiculous. I said, no, I'm being clear. Your daughter made it very clear that I'm not family. You made it very clear by staying silent. So I'm acting accordingly. Susan started crying. She said this wasn't fair, that I was overreacting, that Megan didn't mean it. I said she meant it, and so did you. She begged me to reconsider. She said, we could talk about this, go to counseling, work things out. I said counseling wouldn't change the fact that after 14 years, I was still just the outsider who paid for things. The house sold in 9 days. A young couple from San Francisco. Cash offer, $2.3 million. Marcus called me personally to say it was the fastest sale he'd seen in years. I accepted immediately. Closing was set for 3 weeks later. Susan moved into a hotel. She called me every day, sometimes twice a day, begging me to stop this. I didn't answer most of the calls. When I did, I kept it short. The decision was made. Megan called me too. She was angry. She said I was being cruel to her mother. She said I was punishing them both for one mistake. She said she'd already apologized. What more did I want? I said, "You didn't apologize, Megan. You said you felt bad. That's not the same thing." She said, "Fine. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear?" I said, "It's 14 years too late." She said, "What does that even mean?" I said, "It means I spent 14 years being there for you. And the moment it mattered, you told me I was nobody, so now I'm acting like nobody. I'm disappearing just like you wanted." She started crying. She said I was ruining her wedding, ruining her life, ruining everything. I said, "Megan, I'm not coming to your wedding. I'm not paying for your wedding. I'm not paying for anything anymore. You're 32 years old. You'll figure it out." She said, "You already promised to pay." I said, "And you promised I was part of the family. We both said things that turned out not to be true." Then I hung up. Kevin called me the next day. He was polite, careful. He said he understood I was upset, but could we please talk this through like adults? I said, "Kevin, this doesn't involve you." He said, "It kind of does. You're pulling funding for our wedding." I said, "I'm pulling funding for a wedding I'm not invited to. That seems fair to me." He said Megan was willing to invite me now, if that's what it took. I said, "I don't want a pity invitation, Kevin. I want to be respected. Since that's apparently not possible, I'm removing myself from the situation." He tried to argue. I wished him well and ended the call. The closing date arrived. I'd already moved most of my personal belongings into a storage unit. I'd rented a small condo downtown, something temporary, while I figured out my next move. The night before the new owners took possession, I went back to the house one last time. It was empty. All the furniture was gone, sold, or donated. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. I walked through each room slowly. The living room where Megan had told me I wasn't family. The kitchen where Susan and I used to have coffee every morning. The bedroom where we'd slept for 14 years. In the kitchen, I left something on the counter, a black binder. Inside that binder was a record of every single expense I'd incurred for Megan over the past 14 years. Tuition receipts, rent payments, car payments, business loan payoffs, groceries, utilities, medical bills, travel expenses, everything. I'd spent months compiling it, going through old bank statements, credit card bills, receipts I'd kept in file boxes. Dorothy had helped me organize it all chronologically. The total came to $482,000. Each page was labeled with the date, the amount, and what it was for. At the end of the binder, I'd included a letter. The letter said, "Megan, you told me I was not your father. You told me I was an outsider. You told me I had been pretending for 14 years. You were wrong about the pretending. I never pretended. I was genuine in everything I did for you. But you were right that I'm not your father. Your father passed away when you were 12. I'm just the man who took care of you after that." This binder represents what that care looked like in financial terms. I'm not asking you to pay me back. Money was never the point. But I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to understand what it means when someone chooses to be there for you. Your real father would have done the same things I did, probably more. He would have loved you unconditionally. He would have supported your dreams, even the ones that failed. He would have been there at 2 in the morning when you needed him. I tried to do that too, I tried to be someone you could count on. You've made it clear that wasn't enough. Or perhaps that it was too much. Or perhaps that it simply didn't matter because I wasn't the right person. That's your choice to make. But it's also my choice to accept it and move forward. I'm not coming to your wedding. I'm not paying for your wedding. I'm not paying for anything else in your life. Not because I'm angry, though I am. Not because I want revenge, though part of me does. But because you asked me to disappear. And I'm respecting that request. I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be. I hope Kevin makes you happy. I hope your life is full of people who meet your standards for what real family means. I won't be one of those people. Take care of yourself, Megan. Frank. I left the binder on the counter, locked the door behind me, and drove to my new condo. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7:30. It was Susan. She was screaming. I'd never heard her scream like that before. She'd gone to the house to pick up some items she'd left behind. The new owners had given her permission to stop by before they moved in. That's when she found the binder. She'd read the whole thing. Then she'd called Megan. Megan had driven over. They'd both read it again. Sitting on the floor of the empty kitchen, Susan kept screaming into the phone. She said I was cruel. She said I was petty. She said I'd turned a family disagreement into a war. I said, Susan, Megan told me to disappear. I disappeared. I don't understand why you're surprised. She said, you've destroyed everything. The wedding is in 6 weeks. How is she supposed to pay for it? I said, that's not my problem anymore. She said, $482,000, Frank. You kept track of every penny. What kind of person does that? I said, the kind of person who wanted to remember that he mattered, since apparently nobody else was going to. Megan got on the phone. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't mean it. She said she'd been stupid and selfish, and she understood now what I'd done for her. I said, Megan, you meant it. You meant every word. The only thing you're sorry about is that there are consequences. She said, please, Frank, please, don't do this. I'll invite you to the wedding. You can sit in the front row. You can walk me down the aisle. Whatever you want. I said, I don't want a pity invitation. I wanted respect. I wanted to be treated like I mattered. You made it clear that I don't. So now I'm living accordingly. She begged. She said she'd pay me back every penny, even though she had no idea how. I said, keep your money. Spend it on therapy instead. Maybe figure out why you think people are disposable. Then I hung up. Over the next few days, I received calls from Uncle Mike in Chicago, from Kevin, from 2 of Susan's sisters, from Megan's best friend. Everyone wanted to tell me I was being unreasonable. Everyone wanted to tell me I was hurting people over nothing. I stopped answering my phone. Kevin eventually sent me an email. He said they'd had to downsize the wedding significantly. They were moving it from the Napa Vineyard to a small restaurant in Seattle. The guest list had been cut from 200 to 50. No string quartet, no imported flowers. Just a simple ceremony and dinner. He said Megan was devastated. He said Susan wasn't speaking to Megan, blamed her for destroying the family. He said this whole thing was tearing everyone apart. He asked one more time if I'd reconsider. I didn't reply. The wedding happened on schedule. I know because Susan's sister posted photos on Facebook. It looked nice, small, but nice. Megan wore a simple dress. Kevin wore a suit. They smiled for the camera. I felt nothing looking at those photos. Not satisfaction, not anger, not sadness. Just nothing. 3 months after the wedding, Susan filed for divorce. I didn't contest it. Dorothy handled everything. The divorce was finalized in 6 months. Susan sent me 1 letter during that time. She said she hoped I was happy now that I'd destroyed our family. She said she'd wasted 14 years on me. She said I was a bitter, small man who couldn't handle his ego being bruised. I didn't respond to that either. Megan sent me a letter too. It was long, rambling, full of apologies and explanations. She said she'd been stressed about the wedding. She said she hadn't thought about what she was saying. She said she understood now how much I'd done for her, and she'd spend the rest of her life being grateful. I didn't believe her, but I appreciated the effort. I didn't respond to that either. 6 months after the divorce, I moved to Portland. I'd always liked the city. It was quieter there. I bought a small house overlooking the river, something I could afford easily with the money from selling the Seattle house and splitting the remaining assets with Susan. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching financial literacy to young adults. I joined a hiking group. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. People ask me sometimes if I have family. I say I used to, but not anymore. They usually don't ask follow-up questions. I'm 63 years old now. I've got enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I've got hobbies I enjoy, friends I see regularly, a routine that makes me happy. I don't think about Megan much anymore. When I do, I don't feel angry. I just feel distant, like she's someone I used to know a long time ago. I don't think about Susan either. I think about myself and the choices I made, and whether I'd do anything differently. I wouldn't. People think revenge is about hurting the person who hurt you. It's not. Revenge is about taking back your dignity. It's about refusing to let someone treat you like you don't matter, and then continue benefiting from your presence. I didn't destroy my family. They did that when they decided I was disposable. I just accepted their decision and acted accordingly. Megan wanted me to disappear. So, I did. Not in the way she meant, where I'd quietly absent myself from the wedding, but still be there to pay for everything. Still be there to call when she needed something. Still be there to play the role of the grateful stepfather who knew his place. I disappeared completely. I took my money, my time, my energy, and I redirected it toward a life that actually valued me. That's not cruelty, that's self-respect. Last month, I got a message through Facebook from Kevin. He said Megan had given birth to their first child, a daughter. He said they'd named her Susan, after her grandmother. He said Megan had been talking a lot about family lately, about how she wanted to do better with her daughter than she'd done with the people who'd cared for her. He said she'd like to talk to me sometime, if I was open to it. I read the message twice, then I deleted it. I'm 63 years old. I don't have time to teach grown adults how to treat people with respect. That's a lesson they should have learned a long time ago. I've got a painting class this afternoon. Tomorrow, I'm hiking up in the gorge with my group. Next week, I'm starting a workshop on retirement planning at the community center. My life is full. It's quiet, but it's full. And it's mine. Megan got what she asked for. I disappeared. And in doing so, I found something I didn't even know I'd lost. Myself. What did you think of this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content coming your way.